Well, howdy, partner. Name's Eureka Earl, and I thank you kindly for stopping by Guns and Nuggets. Round these parts, we spin tales where gold was struck, guns were drawn, and legends made. If this here story tickles your fancy, don't be shy. Tip your hat with a like, hitch your wagon with a subscribe, and tell your trail mates. Plenty more tales are waiting.
Howdy, partner. Pull up close to the fire now, closer than you think you need to. The desert night's got teeth out here, and the cold don't ask permission before it sets in. My name's Earl, and I've been riding these trails and telling these tales longer than most folks have been drawing breath. If you're new to these parts, well, you picked a hell of a night to stop by. And if you've been here before, you know what's coming, a story that'll make you think twice about what glitters in the moonlight. Now, I've told you tales about outlaws and lawmen, about gold strikes that made men rich and feuds that left whole families buried. But tonight's different. This one's about a gang so mean, so cold-blooded, that even the devil himself looked the other way when their time came due. They called themselves the Blood Gold Gang, though they didn't choose that name. No, sir, that name chose them, stamped itself onto their souls, the same way those initials were stamped onto the coins they stole. You ever wonder if gold remembers? I mean, really wonder about it, late at night when the wind's howling and your mind won't let you sleep? Whether a piece of metal, cold and lifeless as it seems, might hold on to something of the men who sweated for it, bled for it, died clutching it in their fists. Most folks would call that superstition, old wives' tales told to scare children. But out here in the territories, where the sun bakes the reason right out of the rocks and the wind carries voices that got no business speaking well, out here you learn that some stories ain't just stories. The Blood Gold Gang rode during the meanest years of the frontier, back when the law was still trying to figure out where it belonged and men with guns made their own rules in the spaces in between. 5 men, each one meaner than a rattlesnake with a toothache, each one with a past so dark they never spoke of it even to each other. They robbed, they killed, they took what they wanted and left nothing but blood and smoke in their wake. But there was one job, one particular haul that changed everything. Or maybe it didn't change nothing at all. Maybe it just revealed what was already there, waiting like a rattler under a rock, coiled and patient and deadly. The fire's crackling good now, throwing shadows that dance across the canyon walls. You see them shadows moving? Sometimes I wonder if they're just tricks of the light, or if they're something else. Something that's been waiting, out there in the dark, listening to stories about itself, remembering when it was flesh and bone instead of just a whisper in the wind. This story begins and ends the same way, with a pile of stolen gold that seemed to hum in the moonlight. Not a sound you could rightly hear with your ears, understand. More like a vibration you felt in your chest, in your bones, in the part of your soul that knows when something ain't natural. The kind of sound that makes horses nervous and dogs howl and grown men check over their shoulders even when they know ain't nobody there. 5 outlaws rode out that morning in the spring of 1872. By nightfall, they'd have more gold than any of them had ever seen in one place. By the end of the month, 4 of them would be dead in ways that don't make sense when you say them out loud. And the 5th, well, we'll get to him. His story's the worst of all, because dying ain't always the worst thing that can happen to a man. The desert stretches out around us now, silent except for the pop and hiss of the fire. Out there in that darkness, under sand and stone and the weight of 50 years, there's still coins scattered, little pieces of gold that prospectors find sometimes, gleaming in a wash after a rain or half buried in a canyon where no canyon should be. And every single one of them carries initials, names of men long dead, carved into metal that shouldn't remember but does. Folks who find those coins, they never keep them long. Some say the coins bring bad luck. Others say they bring worse than that they bring a kind of attention you don't want from things that should have stopped paying attention to this world a long time ago. The smart ones, they leave those coins where they lay. The greedy ones, the ones who think gold is just gold and a curse is just a story told to scare children, well, they learn different. They always learn different. I got one of those coins once, years back. Found it gleaming in the dust near. Alamogordo, pretty as you please, just sitting there like it had been waiting for someone to notice it. I picked it up, couldn't help myself, even though I knew better, and the damn thing was warm. Not hot like it had been sitting in the sun. Warm like it had just been in someone's pocket, like living flesh had been holding it close. I looked at the initials carved into it, T.W. Didn't know who that was, not then, but I felt something when I held that coin, something that made the hair on my neck stand up and my horse start dancing sideways like there was a snake nearby. I threw that coin as far as I could throw it, watched it arc through the air and disappear into a ravine. And I rode away fast, partner. Faster than I needed to. Faster than made sense. But here's the thing that still bothers me all these years later. 3 days after I threw that coin away, I found it in my saddlebag. Same coin, same initials, same unnatural warmth. I threw it away again. It came back again. Wasn't until I gave it to a priest in Santa Fe, watched him bury it in consecrated ground with prayers and holy water, that it finally stayed gone. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it's still out there somewhere, working its way through the sand, following currents only it can feel, looking for the next fool who thinks gold is just gold and the past is just the past. The Blood Gold Gang. 5 men who thought they were above consequence, above justice, above the natural order of things. They learned different, same as everyone who crosses certain lines eventually learns. But their learning came hard and came strange, came in ways that made witnesses question what they'd seen and made lawmen close cases they couldn't explain. This is their story. The true story, not the dime novel version you might have heard, not the sanitized tale they tell in town where they leave out the parts that don't make sense, the parts that make you wonder if maybe the world works different than we like to pretend it does. This is the story of 5 men and a pile of gold that remembered every drop of blood spilled to take it. The story of coins that whispered in the darkness and kept count of debts that couldn't be paid with money. You still with me, partner? You sure? Because once we start down this trail, there ain't no turning back. Some stories, you hear them, and they change something in you. They open up a door in your mind that don't close easy, and through that door comes an understanding you maybe didn't want. An understanding that the world's got deeper shadows than you thought, and in those shadows, things move that don't follow the rules we're comfortable with. The wind's picking up now, carrying dust and the smell of distant rain that probably won't reach us. In that wind, if you listen close, you can almost hear it, the soft clink of metal on metal, like coins in a purse, like gold pieces shifting in a bag. Old-timers out here, they cross themselves when they hear that sound. They know what it means. They know whose fingers are counting that gold, even though those fingers rotted away to bone decades ago. The Blood Gold Gang rode out one spring morning with empty saddlebags and murder in their hearts. They rode back that evening with gold enough to make them rich and a curse that would follow them to graves and beyond. This is how it happened. This is how it always happens. When men get greedy enough and cruel enough and convinced enough that they're above the reckoning that comes for us all. So, settle in close, keep your eyes on the fire, and don't look too hard at those shadows moving at the edge of the light. What you can't see won't hurt you usually. And if you hear coins clinking out there in the dark, well, best to pretend you didn't. Best to let some things pass by without acknowledgement, without drawing attention to yourself. The story of the Blood Gold Gang starts with 5 living men and ends with 5 dead ones. But dying was just the beginning of their troubles, not the end. Death don't always settle accounts, partner. Sometimes it just changes the terms. Now then, let's talk about how it all began with a payroll wagon rolling through the desert, guards who thought they were safe, and 5 men who were about to learn that some gold costs more than you can ever pay. The spring of 1872 came late to the territories, the way it sometimes does when winter gets stubborn and won't let go. The desert was just starting to shake off the cold when 5 men met in a dried-up creek bed about 30 miles south of Socorro. They came from different directions, arrived at different times, each one checking behind him to make sure he hadn't been followed. These were careful men had to be, in their line of work. Careless outlaws ended up decorating the ends of ropes or feeding the buzzards in some nameless gulch. Brig Holler was the first to arrive, which was fitting since it was his plan, his job, his idea of how to make them all rich. Brig was a big man, not tall but thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that never quite looked at you straight on, always watching the corners, always checking the angles, always calculating odds and escape routes and who to shoot first if things went sideways. He'd been riding the outlaw trail for near about 15 years, ever since he'd killed a man in Kansas over a card game and had to light out for the territories. Started with small jobs, stagecoaches, lone travelers, the occasional ranch house when he needed supplies and didn't care to pay for them. Worked his way up to banks and trains, gathering a reputation along the way, not a famous reputation, not like Jesse James or Billy the Kid. Brig was smart enough to stay below that kind of notice. But among men who lived outside the law, his name meant something. Meant you could trust him to plan a job right, to keep his head when bullets started flying, and to split the take fair or fair enough. The second man to arrive was Marcus Cutter, and if Brig was the brains of the outfit, Cutter was the knife. Thin as a whip and twice as mean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old bone. He had a way of moving that made you think of scorpions, quick and smooth and deadly, striking before you even knew you were in danger. Cutter had killed his first man at 16 and hadn't stopped counting after 20. He wore 2 knives, one on each hip, and a pistol he barely ever used. Said guns made too much noise, drew too much attention. A knife was personal, intimate, quiet. Cutter came from somewhere back east, originally Philadelphia, maybe, or Boston. Nobody knew for sure because he never talked about it. And asking questions about a man's past out here was a good way to end up bleeding in the dirt. Whatever had happened back there, it had turned him into something cold and empty, like a snake that had forgot it used to be warm-blooded. Frank Haynes arrived third, looking nervous the way he always did. Haynes was the weak link in the gang, and everybody knew it, including Haynes himself. He wasn't cut out for outlaw work, didn't have the stomach for the violence, didn't have the nerve for the risks. But he was good with horses, near genius-level good, could gentle the meanest bronc and coax speed out of animals that looked half dead. That skill kept him alive and kept him employed, because a gang that lived on horseback needed someone who understood horses like they were family. Haynes had a wife somewhere, or said he did, kept a tintype in his shirt pocket, a faded image of a woman with sad eyes. He'd take it out sometimes when he thought nobody was watching, stare at it like it was a map to somewhere he couldn't get back to. The others gave him grief about it, said a man in their business couldn't afford attachments, couldn't afford to care about anything except the next score and staying alive long enough to spend it. But they kept him around anyway, because good horse handlers were rare and Haynes hadn't ratted them out yet. Murphy was next, and he came in singing. Always singing was Murphy, or humming or whistling. Irish songs mostly, old ballads about rebellion and lost loves and men who died with glory but empty pockets. Murphy was the one who'd lift your spirits when the trail got long, who'd make you laugh when times were hard, who'd share his last bit of whiskey and his last piece of jerky without complaint. He was also the one who'd shoot you in the back without hesitation if the situation called for it, and sing a merry tune while he went through your pockets. That was Murphy's gift, making you forget what he was, making you think of him as a friend instead of a predator. But underneath that charm and those songs was the same cold calculation that lived in all of them, the same willingness to do whatever it took to survive and profit. Murphy just dressed it up prettier than the others, that's all. Made the medicine go down easier. Last to arrive was Jed Lowe, and he came in like a ghost, silent and careful, appearing from behind a rock like he'd materialized out of the stone itself. Jed was the tracker, the scout, the one who could read sign like other men read books, Show him a week-old trail and he could tell you how many riders, what they were carrying, whether they were in a hurry or taking their time. Put him in country he'd never seen before and he'd find water, find shelter, find the best route through terrain that would kill most men. Jed was also half mad, in a way that made even the others nervous sometimes. He talked to himself, had conversations with people who weren't there, would sometimes stop in the middle of riding and stare at nothing for minutes at a time. But he was useful, too useful to cut loose, so they tolerated his strangeness and tried not to think about what might be going on in that damaged mind of his. 5 men, 5 different types of dangerous, 5 different reasons for being there, but all sharing the same goal, to take something that didn't belong to them and get rich doing it. Brigg waited until they'd all gathered, until they'd checked their weapons and drunk some water and settled into the shade of the creek bank. Then he told them about the payroll wagon. Silver Hill Mining Company, he said, his voice gravelly from too many nights sleeping rough and too many days breathing dust. They're moving payroll from Santa Fe to their operations down south. 3,000 in gold coin, maybe more, coming through Jornada del Muerto in 2 days' time. The others leaned forward. 3,000 in gold. Split 5 ways, that was 600 each more money than most men saw in 5 years of honest work. Enough to disappear for a while, to lie low until any heat died down. Enough to matter. Guards? Cutter asked, his voice soft and dangerous. 4. 2 riding shotgun on the wagon, 2 more on horseback alongside. All armed, all experienced. But it's open country through the Jornada. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run if things go wrong. They'll be feeling safe, which makes them vulnerable. How'd you hear about this? Murphy wanted to know. Briggs smiled without humor. Let's just say I got friends in low places. The information's good. They spent the next hour planning. Where to hit the wagon, a narrow place where the trail ran between 2 low ridges, giving them high ground and crossfire. When to hit it late afternoon, when the sun would be in the guards' eyes and the shadows would work in the outlaws' favor. How to hit it hard and fast, no warnings, no chances given. Kill everyone and sort through the bodies after. That was Briggs' rule, and he was firm about it. No witnesses. Witnesses could identify you, could testify in court, could haunt you for the rest of your life, however short that might be. Dead men told no tales, kept no secrets, pointed no fingers. It was cleaner that way, simpler. The others nodded agreement. They'd all done this before, all had blood on their hands already. What was a few more bodies? What was a payroll guard or a wagon driver compared to the weight of gold in your saddlebags? Only Haines looked troubled, his hands fidgeting with his horse's reins. What if there's women? He asked quietly. What if they got wives riding along? Or, then they die too, Briggs said flatly. I ain't leaving nothing alive that can put a rope around my neck. You got a problem with that, Frank. You can ride out now. No hard feelings. But if you stay, you do what needs doing. Haines stayed. He always stayed. That was his weakness and his tragedy. He knew what was right, but didn't have the courage to choose it. They rode out the next morning, taking their time, letting the horses set the pace. No point wearing out the animals before the job even started. They camped that night in the shadow of the Fra Cristobal Mountains, ate cold food and drank warm water, and didn't light a fire. Jed walked the perimeter, checking for tracks, making sure they were alone. Murphy hummed quietly, some Irish tune about death and glory. Cutter sharpened his knives, the sound of steel on stone like a whisper of what was coming. And Briggs sat apart from the others, staring at the stars, thinking about 3,000 in gold and what a man could do with that kind of money. Thinking about saloons and women and poker games, about living high for a while, about the difference between being an outlaw scratching by on pennies and being an outlaw with real money in his pocket. He didn't think about the people in that wagon, about their lives or their families or their right to keep living. Didn't think about the weight that killing carries, the way it accumulates on a man's soul like dust on an old coat. Briggs had stopped thinking about such things years ago. Had to, if he wanted to keep doing what he did. Conscience was a luxury outlaws couldn't afford. The next day they reached their ambush point by mid-morning, got themselves positioned on both sides of the trail, horses hidden in a draw, weapons loaded and ready. Then they waited, patient as buzzards, for their prey to arrive. The payroll wagon came through right on schedule, just like Briggs' information said it would. 3 horses pulling a reinforced freight wagon, iron-banded and heavy. 2 men on the bench, both carrying rifles. 2 more riders flanking it, alert but not alarmed. They were in the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man, but the name didn't seem to bother them none. It was just a piece of desert, just a road between here and there. They never saw it coming. Briggs gave the signal a whistle like a hawk, and 5 rifles opened up from 2 directions. The guards never had a chance to return fire, never had time to shout a warning. They fell like puppets with cut strings, blood spraying, bodies tumbling from saddles and wagon bench. The horses pulling the wagon tried to bolt, but Haines had that covered. He spurred his mount down from the ridge and caught the led horse by the bridle, bringing the whole team to a shuddering halt. The wagon swayed, its cargo shifting inside, and for a moment the only sound was the jingle of harness and the labored breathing of frightened horses. Then Cutter was there, knife in hand, checking bodies. "All dead," he reported, his voice flat and professional. "Clean work." Briggs dismounted and walked to the back of the wagon. His hands were steady as he worked the lock on the strongbox, patient despite the excitement thrumming through him. The lock was good quality, designed to withstand hammer blows and pry bars. But Briggs had brought a small powder charge, just enough to blow the mechanism without destroying the contents. The explosion was sharp and brief, leaving his ears ringing. When the smoke cleared, the strongbox lid hung open on broken hinges, and there it was, gold coins, stacked in neat rows, gleaming in the afternoon sun. More gold than Briggs had ever seen in one place, more wealth than he'd accumulated in 15 years of robbery and theft. $3,000, just like his information had promised, maybe more. The others gathered around, staring at the gold like pilgrims staring at a shrine. Murphy let out a low whistle. Jed giggled, a high nervous sound. Even Cutter's face showed something that might have been satisfaction, but it was Haines who noticed the detail that would matter later, the detail that would prove to be their undoing. "Briggs," he said slowly, his voice strange, "look at the coins." Briggs picked one up, held it to the light, and saw what Haines had seen initials carved into the soft gold. Crude letters, done with a nail or a knife point. T.W. on this coin. J.M. on the next. Every coin marked, every piece of gold bearing someone's mark. Custom minted, Murphy breathed. "These ain't from the government mint. These are from the miners themselves. They melted down their own gold, stamped it into coins, marked it so they'd know which was theirs." It made sense in a way. The mining company would pay its workers in the gold they dug up, let them make their own coins to spend in town. Personal currency, each piece tied to the man who'd sweated and bled to pull it from the earth. Briggs laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet of the desert. "Blood money," he said. "We just stole blood money." The others laughed too, nervous and excited. It seemed funny at the time, seemed like just another detail and just another robbery. They couldn't know that those initials mattered. That gold remembers, and blood calls to blood, and some debts get collected in ways that have nothing to do with law or justice. They loaded the gold into their saddlebags, working quickly now, eager to be gone from this place. Left the bodies where they lay, let the buzzards have them, let the sun bleach their bones. The desert would keep their secret. It always did. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, they were 15 miles away, riding hard for the Pecos River where they planned to split up and disappear into the territories. Behind them, the payroll wagon sat silent in the Jornada del Muerto, surrounded by dead men, marked by the violence that had passed through. And in their saddlebags the gold coins clinked and shifted, still warm from the sun, or maybe warm from something else. maybe carrying heat that had nothing to do with daylight and everything to do with the blood that had been spilled to take them. The Blood Gold Gang had just made their names. They didn't know it yet, but they'd also just signed their death warrants. The coins would see to that. The initials carved into all that gold, they weren't just marks of ownership. They were names on a list, and someone, somewhere, had started reading that list out loud. They reached the Pecos River 2 days after the robbery, riding hard through country that most men avoided cactus and rock and sand that could kill you 6 different ways if you weren't careful. But they were careful, and they were motivated, and the weight of the gold in their saddlebags kept them pushing forward, even when the horses started to flag and the water ran low. The Pecos was running high that spring, fed by snowmelt from the mountains to the north. It cut through the desert like a wound, brown water churning between red rock banks, cottonwood trees clinging to life along its edges. It wasn't much to look at, but it was water and it was cover, and right now, that's what they needed most. They made camp in a grove of cottonwoods about a 1/4 mile downstream from where an old Spanish trail crossed the river. Good defensive position. They could see anyone coming from 3 directions, and the 4th direction was the river itself, too deep and fast to cross easy. They picketed the horses, built a small fire for coffee, and finally, they opened the saddlebags and spread out their take. $3,472 in gold coins. Brigg counted it twice to be sure, stacking the coins in neat piles, his fingers moving quick and precise. The others watched, their faces lit by firelight and greed, as the piles grew taller. $694, 40 cents each, Brigg announced when he finished. Split 5 ways, fair and square. He doled out the shares with the same precision he'd counted with, sliding stacks of coins across a flat rock they were using as a table. Each man took his share, hefted it, felt the weight of all that gold, $600, more money than most of them had ever held at one time, enough to matter, enough to change things. Murphy started giggling, that Irish lilt to his voice getting stronger the way it did when he was excited. "Boys, we're rich. By God, we're actually rich." He picked up a handful of his coins, let them fall through his fingers back onto the pile, the soft clink of metal on metal sounding almost like music. Even Cutter smiled, a thin expression that didn't reach his eyes but was the closest thing to joy his face knew how to make. "Split it up further," he suggested. "Carry some on you, bury some, cache some in different spots. That way, if we get robbed or lose a horse, we ain't losing everything." It was sound advice, the kind of thinking that kept outlaws alive. They divided their shares again, each man keeping 100 in his saddlebags, 50 in his pockets, and burying the rest in individual caches along the riverbank. Jed marked the spots in his own peculiar way, a rock here, a bent stick there, signs that meant something to him but would look like random nature to anyone else. That's when the first strange thing happened. Haynes was digging his cache hole, working the sandy soil with his hands, when he hit something solid about a foot down. "Hell," he muttered, figuring it was a rock. But when he cleared away the sand, it wasn't a rock at all. It was a coin. One of their coins, the gold they'd just stolen, marked with initials in that crude, hand-carved way. He held it up to the firelight, confused. "How'd this get here? I ain't buried nothing yet." The others gathered around, staring at the coin in his hand. The initials were clear in the flickering light. "RG must have dropped it," Murphy suggested. "Must have fell out when you were dividing your share." But Haynes shook his head slowly. "I ain't been over here yet. This is my first time at this spot. And look," he pointed at the sand around the coin. "It's packed hard, like this been here a while. Weeks, maybe. But we just got here an hour ago." Nobody had an explanation for that. They stood there in uncomfortable silence, the fire popping, the river rushing past in the darkness. Finally, Brigg shrugged and said, "Coincidence. Some prospector probably buried it and forgot about it. Happens all the time." It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't explain why the coin looked exactly like theirs. down to the same kind of gold, the same hand-carved initials. Didn't explain why finding it made them all uneasy in a way they couldn't quite name. Haines pocketed the coin. It was gold, after all, and gold was gold, and moved to a different spot to bury his share. The others went back to their own caches, but the mood had shifted. The celebration was over. Now they just wanted the gold buried and hidden so they could move on. They finished their work in silence and settled in for the night. Brigg took first watch, sitting with his back against a cottonwood and his rifle across his knees. The others rolled up in their blankets and tried to sleep, though sleep came hard after the excitement of the past few days. Around midnight, the horses started acting strange. It was Haines's horse that spooked first, a big roan gelding that was usually steady as a rock. It suddenly snorted and pulled at its picket line, eyes rolling white, ears pinned back. Then the others joined in, all 5 horses dancing and pulling, making nervous sounds deep in their throats. Brigg was on his feet immediately, rifle ready, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "Somebody coming," he hissed, waking the others. Horses wouldn't act like that unless... But there was nobody. No sound of riders, no jingle of harness, no voices calling challenges. Just the horses freaking out about something only they could sense, and the vast, empty darkness of the desert night pressing in around their little camp. Jed moved out into that darkness, reading sign by moonlight, his damaged mind somehow perfect for this kind of work. He circled the entire camp twice, checking for tracks, for any evidence of what had spooked the horses. When he came back, his face was troubled. "Nothing," he reported. "No tracks, no sign, nothing." He paused, then added quietly, "But I heard something out there. Boots. Walking slow, like someone was taking their time, not worried about making noise." "Where?" Brigg demanded. "Everywhere. All around us. Like we were surrounded by men walking, but there ain't no men, just the sound of them." The others exchanged glances. Jed was crazy. They all knew that. But crazy didn't mean wrong, and his tracking skills had never failed them before. If he said he heard something, he heard something. They kept double watch the rest of the night, 2 men always awake, rifles ready, jumping at every sound. The horses stayed nervous, calming some but never fully settling. And twice more, Cutter swore he heard it too, the sound of boots walking through sand, circling their camp, getting closer, then fading away. But there was never anyone there, just sounds, just shadows, just the feeling of being watched by eyes that had no business watching. Dawn came slow and cold, the sun taking its time climbing over the eastern horizon. They broke camp quickly, eager to be moving, to put distance between themselves and whatever had visited them in the night. Didn't talk about it much. What was there to say? That they were spooked? That they'd heard ghosts? Men in their line of work couldn't afford to admit to fear. Fear was weakness, and weakness got you killed. They decided to split up, like they'd planned from the beginning. Safer that way, harder for any law that might be following to track 5 different men going 5 different directions. They'd meet back up in a month in a cantina in El Paso and figure out their next move then. Murphy headed south, toward Mexico, singing some Irish tune about a girl with black hair and green eyes. Jed went west, into the roughest country, where only someone with his tracking skills could survive. Haines rode east, back toward civilization and the wife he claimed to have. Cutter headed north, a lone wolf going back to lone wolf country, and Briggs stayed at the river for one more day, telling himself he was just being cautious, making sure nobody had followed them. But the truth was, he didn't want to leave. Something about that place felt wrong now, felt tainted. The gold buried along the bank seemed to pull at him, seemed to whisper that leaving it behind was a mistake. That night, alone in his camp, he heard them clearly for the first time. Not the sound of boots walking that was just Jed's craziness rubbing off on him. No, this was different. This was actual voices, whispers, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in tones too low to make out individual words. But the feeling of the whispers was clear enough anger, accusation, demand. Briggs sat up, pistol drawn, heart hammering. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness. The whispers stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space they'd occupied, a silence so complete it was almost worse than the voices. Then, from out by the river, where the moonlight touched the water, a figure, standing on the far bank, too distant to make out clearly. Just a shape, man-sized, unmoving, watching. Briggs blinked, and the figure was closer, on this side of the river now, standing at the edge of the firelight, still too shadowed to see clearly, but definitely there, definitely real. He raised his pistol, aimed at center mass. I said, "Who's there? Identify yourself or I'll shoot." The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, silent and patient, like it had all the time in the world. Briggs fired. The shot was loud in the night. The muzzle flashed bright. He saw the bullet hit, or thought he did, saw the figure stagger slightly, but when his vision cleared from the flash, the figure was still standing, still watching. Now it was closer. 10 feet away, maybe less, close enough that Briggs could see it was a man, or had been, wearing the rough clothes of a miner, face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat, wet. Everything about him was wet, like he'd just climbed out of the river, water dripping from his clothes, leaving dark stains on the sand. "Stay back," Briggs warned, his voice cracking. "I'm warning you, stay back or I'll—" The figure raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, pointed at Briggs, held that pointing finger steady for one long moment, then turned and walked back toward the river, movement stiff and strange, like a puppet badly handled. It reached the water's edge and kept walking, not swimming, not wading, walking. Walked right into the Pecos and kept going, the water rising up past its knees, its waist, its chest, its neck, until finally the hat disappeared beneath the surface and it was gone. Briggs stood there for a long time, pistol still raised, hand shaking, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it, trying to explain it away as exhaustion, as stress, as anything but what it felt like, a warning, a promise, a message from the dead. He broke camp before first light and rode out hard, not caring which direction, just needing to be away from that place. Behind him, the gold lay buried in the sand, marked by Jed's cryptic signs, waiting patiently in the staid darkness. And in the river, something stirred. Water moved against the current, swirling in patterns that had nothing to do with natural flow. If you'd been there to see it, and thank God nobody was, you would have seen coins rising to the surface, dozens of them, floating like dead leaves, floating and then sinking again, pulled down by hands that reached up from the depths. The Pecos ran dark that morning, darker than water should run. Ran dark and ran cold, and the fish that usually fed in the shallows stayed deep and still, like prey hiding from a predator. The gold wouldn't stay buried. It never does, when it's got blood on it. Some debts don't take long to come due, and the Blood Gold Gang was about to learn just how short the collection period can be when you steal from the dead. Marcus Cutter rode into Socorro 5 days after leaving the Pecos River, his saddlebags heavy with stolen gold and his conscience light as the desert air. He'd never seen the point in guilt. What was done, and worrying about it wouldn't change nothing. The dead were dead, the gold was his, and that was the natural order of things as far as he was concerned. Socorro was a rough town, the kind of place where asking too many questions could get you dead, and minding your own business was the closest thing to civic virtue. Silver mines in the hills brought money and miners and all the parasites that fed on men with dust in their lungs and silver in their pockets, saloons and brothels and gambling halls, each one louder and seedier than the last. Perfect place for a man like Cutter to disappear into for a while. He took a room at the El Dorado Hotel, paid cash for a week in advance, and told the clerk he was a prospector down from the hills with a little color to spend. It was a common enough story. The clerk barely looked at him, just took the money and handed over a key to a room on the second floor that overlooked the street. Cutter slept most of the first day, his body catching up on all the sleep he'd missed during the robbery and the ride afterward. Slept hard and dreamless, the way men sleep when they've got no conscience to trouble them. When he woke up, it was evening, and the sounds of the town coming to life drifted through his window, tinny piano music, loud laughter, the occasional gunshot that nobody seemed to pay much attention to. He cleaned up as best he could with the basin and pitcher in his room, changed into fresh clothes, and headed downstairs. His plan was simple: find a friendly game of cards, spend a little gold to avoid suspicion, stay drunk enough to be sociable but not so drunk he'd say something stupid, and generally behave like any other miner celebrating a good strike. The Silver Dollar Saloon was 3 doors down from the hotel, a 2-story building with painted windows and a sign that hung crooked over the entrance. Inside, it was everything you'd expect: sawdust on the floor, smoke thick enough to cut with a knife, bar along one wall and gambling tables along the other. Women in bright dresses worked the crowd, selling drinks and smiles and other things if the price was right. Cutter bellied up to the bar and ordered whiskey. The bartender was a heavy-set man with a scar running from his ear to his chin, the kind of mark a knife leaves when it just barely misses killing you. He poured Cutter's drink without comment, took the dollar coin Cutter slid across the bar, and started to ring it up. Then he froze. His hand stayed on the coin, but his eyes lifted to Cutter's face, and the expression there, it was like he'd seen a ghost. Color drained from his features, leaving him pale and sweating despite the warmth of the room. "Where'd you get this?" the bartender asked, his voice quiet and dangerous. Cutter tensed, hand drifting toward his knife. "Found it." "Why?" "Found it where?" "What's it matter? Gold is gold." But the bartender was shaking his head, his fingers trembling where they rested on the coin. "This here's got my brother's initials on it. T. W. Thomas Whitmore. He was a miner working for Silver Hill Company, headed to the diggings with a payroll wagon last week. Wagon never arrived. They found it 2 days ago in the Jornada, everybody dead, all the gold stolen. The noise in the saloon continued around them, but Cutter didn't hear it anymore. His whole focus had narrowed down to the bartender's face, to the coin sitting between them, to the implications of what had just been said. "Coincidence," Cutter managed. "Could be another T.W. Could be. Ain't no coincidence." The bartender's other hand came up from under the bar holding a shotgun, both barrels pointed at Cutter's chest. Tom carved his initials special, left the W looking like 3 peaks for the mountains he came from. "Look at this coin. Same carving, same man. My brother's gold." Other men in the saloon were starting to notice the confrontation, starting to turn and watch. The piano player stumbled to a stop mid-tune. Women backed away, knowing what was coming, having seen it before. Cutter's mind raced. He could go for his knives, but not before the bartender pulled those triggers. Could try to talk his way out, but what was there to say? The evidence was right there on the bar, stamped in soft gold, undeniable. "Easy now," Cutter said, raising his hand slowly. "Let's talk about this. I didn't kill your brother. I found that coin, like I said. Somebody must have dropped it, and you're one of them that did it." The bartender's voice was getting louder, attracting more attention. "You're one of the bastards that murdered my brother and stole that payroll. Somebody get the sheriff. Get him now." Cutter knew he had seconds, maybe less. He went for his knife, the one on his left hip, the good one with the bone handle and the blade he kept sharp enough to shave with. Fast as a striking snake, the move practiced 10,000 times, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought was too slow. But the bartender was faster, or maybe he was just expecting it, ready for it, his finger already tightening on the trigger. The shotgun blast was tremendous in the enclosed space, a sound that overwhelmed everything else, that made men's ears ring and women scream, and the very air seemed to shudder. Cutter took both barrels in the chest from less than 6 feet away. The impact lifted him off his feet and threw him backward into the men standing behind him. He was dead before he hit the sawdust, chest opened up like a gutted deer, eyes already glazing over with the particular emptiness that only violent death brings. The saloon erupted into chaos. Men shouting, women screaming, everyone trying to get out of the line of fire in case the bartender decided to reload and keep shooting. But the bartender just stood there, shotgun smoking in his hands, tears running down his scarred face. "He killed Tom," he kept saying, to nobody in particular. "He killed my brother. I know it. I know it in my bones." The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later, a gray-haired man named Dalton who'd been keeping peace in Socorro for longer than most of its current residents had been alive. He took in the scene with weary eyes, the body, the bartender, the crowd, the shotgun, and sighed the sigh of a man who'd seen this play out too many times before. "Self-defense," the bartender said flatly. "He went for his knife. I defended myself." A dozen witnesses nodded agreement. They might not have seen exactly what happened, might not have been looking at just the right moment, but they knew which side their bread was buttered on. The bartender was local, well-liked, a man who'd lived in Socorro for 15 years and never caused trouble. The dead man was a stranger, an outsider, and probably an outlaw besides if that coin meant what the bartender said it meant. Sheriff Dalton had Cutter's body searched, found more gold coins in his pockets, in his money belt, hidden in his boots, every single one of them marked with initials, every single one matching the description of the coins stolen from that payroll wagon. Found his knives, too, and a pistol, and a folded wanted poster from Kansas describing a man who looked a lot like Cutter and was wanted for murder. "Well," Dalton said quietly, rolling one of the coins between his fingers, "looks like justice got served after all, even if it wasn't in a courtroom." They buried Cutter the next morning in the potter's field outside town. No marker, no ceremony, just a hole in the ground and the thud of dirt falling on cheap pine. The bartender watched from a distance, his arms crossed, his face hard. When they finished filling in the grave, he walked over and dropped something on the mound of fresh earth, a gold coin, the one Cutter had used to pay for that whiskey, the one with his brother's initials carved into it. "You can keep it," the bartender said to the grave. "It's paid for now, paid in full." He turned and walked back to town, back to the Silver Dollar Saloon where he'd clean up the blood and sawdust and try to forget the sound his shotgun had made, the way Cutter had looked flying backward, the weight of taking a life, even when that life probably deserved taking. But here's the strange thing, the thing that would get talked about in whispers for years after. By sunset that day, the coin was gone. The undertaker swore he'd seen the bartender drop it on the grave. A couple of miners who'd been standing nearby confirmed it. But when someone went out to the potter's field that evening, just curious, just wanting to see if it was still there, the mound of earth was undisturbed and the coin had vanished. Stolen, probably. Some scavenger had dug it up, taken it, pocketed it. Had to be. What else could explain it? Except nobody had been seen entering or leaving the cemetery. Except the ground around Cutter's grave showed no signs of digging. Except the coin was simply gone, as if it had never been there at all, as if the earth itself had swallowed it up. And that night, in the Silver Dollar Saloon, the bartender had a dream. Dreamed he was standing behind his bar like always, pouring drinks, making change. But the saloon was empty except for one customer. A man in rough mining clothes, his back to the bar, his hat pulled low. The man turned around, and it was his brother, Tom. Dead 5 days now, killed in the Jornada del Muerto, but standing there as real as anything. Water dripped from his clothes, pooled on the floor around his boots. His face was pale, lips blue, eyes open but not quite focusing right. "Thanks," Tom said in the dream. His voice sounded distant, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "One down." "One down?" the bartender repeated. "What do you mean, one down?" Tom smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of someone who's seen something terrible and can't unsee it, who knows secrets that would drive living men mad. 5 men killed us, Tom said. Killed all of us on that wagon. Took our gold, the gold we carved our names into, the gold we sweated for and bled for and died never spending. One of them is dead now. That's a start. Tom, I don't understand. What are you? 4 more, Tom interrupted. 4 more to go, and we'll find them. The gold will find them. It always does. It remembers, you see. Gold always remembers the blood spilled to take it. He turned then, walked toward the saloon doors. The bartender tried to follow, tried to call out to his brother, but his feet wouldn't move, his voice wouldn't work. He could only watch as Tom pushed through the doors and out into the night. And as he went, coins fell from his clothes, gold coins, dozens of them, clinking as they hit the floor, each one stamped with initials, each one marked with someone's name. The bartender woke up sweating, his heart racing, his sheets tangled around his legs. It was just a dream, he told himself, just his mind working through the trauma of killing a man, even a man who probably deserved killing. Just guilt and grief all mixed together. But when he went down to open the saloon that morning, there were coins scattered across the floor. Dozens of them, the coins from his dream. He picked one up with shaking hands, held it to the light. T.W., his brother's initials, his brother's gold. He gathered them all up, every single one, his hands trembling so bad he kept dropping them, counted them 3 times to be sure. 47 coins. He put them in a cloth bag, tied it shut, and that very day took them to the church. Gave them to Father Mendez with instructions to bury them in consecrated ground, to say prayers over them, to do whatever needed doing to put them to rest. Father Mendez blessed the coins and buried them beside the church, said prayers in Latin over the grave he dug for them, sprinkled holy water, made the sign of the cross, did everything the old rituals prescribed for laying troubled spirits to rest. But 3 days later, a drunk stumbled out of the desert claiming he'd found a pile of gold coins just sitting in the sand, marked with initials, still warm like someone had just been holding them. He came to town to celebrate his good fortune. They were the same coins. The bartender recognized them immediately, recognized the initials, recognized the particular way Tom had carved his W to look like mountain peaks. The coins he'd given to the church that had been buried in consecrated ground, they'd come back. The drunk spent one of those coins in a brothel that night. By morning he was dead, throat cut ear to ear, killed for his money by a woman he'd gotten too rough with. Or so the story went. Or so everyone agreed to believe. The madam of the brothel found the rest of the drunk's gold and kept it for herself, payment for cleaning up the mess, she figured. By the end of the week she was sick with fever, delirious, talking to people who weren't there. Died 6 days after the drunk, raving about drowning, about water filling her lungs even though she was nowhere near water, about hands pulling her down. The coins disappeared again, turned up again. A pattern was starting to emerge, though nobody wanted to acknowledge it. The gold from the payroll wagon, the blood gold, as it was starting to be called, it was cursed, brought death to anyone who touched it, anyone who tried to spend it, anyone who thought they could profit from it. The bartender never touched another coin with initials carved in it, wouldn't accept them as payment, wouldn't handle them even to make change. And he never talked about his brother again, never mentioned the dream he'd had the night after shooting Cutter. But late at night, when the saloon was closed and he was alone counting the day's receipts, he sometimes thought he heard it, the soft clink of coins falling to the floor, the whisper of a dead man's voice saying, 4 more to go. And he'd look up from his counting, heart racing, and see nothing. Nothing but shadows and empty chairs and the memory of a man flying backward, chest opened up by a shotgun blast, dying for gold that wouldn't stay buried and blood that wouldn't stop calling for payment. Cutter was the first to die, but he wouldn't be the last. The Blood Gold Gang had stolen from the wrong people, and the dead were lining up to collect what they were owed. 1 down, 4 more to go. The coins would find them. They always did. News travels slow in the territories, but it travels. Takes maybe 2 weeks for word to spread from Socorro to El Paso, carried by traders and drifters and men who make their living moving information along with goods. By the time the story reached the cantina where the Blood Gold Gang had planned to meet up, it had grown teeth and gained details that might or might not have been true. They said Cutter had been killed over the payroll gold. They said the bartender who'd shot him had been visited by his dead brother's ghost. They said the coins were cursed, that anyone who touched them died screaming. Some of it was exaggeration. the way stories always get bigger in the telling. But the core of it was true enough to make the 3 surviving members of the gang nervous when they finally gathered at that cantina. Murphy arrived first, 2 days before they were supposed to meet. He looked thinner than he had a month ago, his eyes shadowed and nervous, that perpetual Irish humor notably absent from his face. He took a corner table where he could watch both the door and the window, ordered mezcal, and drank it faster than was wise. Haines came in next, spotted Murphy, and joined him without a word. He looked worse, pale and sweating despite the cool evening, his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold his glass. They sat in silence for a while, 2 men who'd ridden together and killed together now finding they had nothing to say to each other. "You heard?" Murphy finally asked. "About Cutter?" "Yeah, I heard. They're saying it was the gold, saying it's cursed." Haines laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It's cursed, all right, but not the way they mean. We killed those people, Murphy. Shot 'em down like dogs. You think that kind of thing don't come back on you? We've done worse before. You've done worse. Why is this different?" Because Haines stopped, struggling with how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "Because this time it feels like they're still here, like they're watching, following, waiting." Murphy wanted to argue, wanted to tell Haines he was being superstitious, letting his conscience make him see things that weren't there. But he couldn't, because Murphy had been feeling it too. That sensation of being watched. The dreams that woke him up, sweating and gasping. The sounds in the night that had no source. "Where's your share?" Murphy asked suddenly. "The gold you buried at the Pecos?" "I dug it up," Haines admitted, 3 days after we split up. Couldn't stand leaving it there. Kept thinking someone would find it, so I went back and got it. And Haines took a long drink before answering. "It was already dug up when I got there. The hole was open, the gold scattered around like someone had been counting it. But my markers were still in place. Nobody could have found that spot without knowing exactly where to look. Maybe an animal. It wasn't an animal." Haines's voice was flat, certain. "The coins were arranged in a circle, perfect circle, like someone drew it with a compass, and in the center of the circle was mud, river mud, like someone had come up out of the Pecos, dug up my gold, and left me a message." Murphy felt cold despite the warmth of the cantina. "What'd you do?" "I took the gold and ran. What else could I do?" "But Murphy," he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I counted it when I got to town. Had $644 when I buried it. When I dug it up, there was 646. 2 extra coins, and both of them had initials I'd never seen before on any of our take." "What initials?" "MC." Haines spelled it out. "MC, Marcus Cutter." "I found 2 coins with his initials, even though Cutter carved his name into nothing, never marked his gold at all. Those coins weren't in that hole when I buried it, Murphy. They got added after Cutter died." They sat with that for a while, drinking steadily, neither one wanting to say what they were both thinking. Finally Murphy spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "You still got your share on you?" "Most of it." "Why?" "Check it. Count it. Tell me if it's the same as what you buried." Haines didn't want to. Could see on his face that he really didn't want to. But he pulled out his money belt anyway, the one he wore under his shirt, heavy with gold coins. Poured them out on the table, counting quick and quiet, trying not to draw attention from the other patrons. His face went white as fresh snow. "Well," Murphy prompted, "I had 646 when I dug it up, spent maybe 100 on supplies and travel. Should have 546, give or take." His hands were shaking harder now, barely able to stack the coins. "I got 548, 2 extra. And I'll give you one guess what initials are on them." Murphy didn't need to guess. He pulled out his own share, the coins he'd been carrying, the ones he'd spent the last month trying not to think about. Started counting. His math was off too. Had more than he should have, not less. 3 extra coins, each one marked with initials he recognized. T.W. Thomas Whitmore, the bartender's brother. The first dead man from the wagon. J.M., probably another one of the guards or passengers they'd killed. And M.C., Marcus Cutter. It's keeping count, Murphy said slowly, the realization dawning like a cold sun. The gold is keeping count of the dead. Every time one of us dies, new coins appear, marked with their initials. That's impossible. Gold, don't it? Can't it? Murphy's voice was getting louder, the mescal and the fear loosening his tongue. We stole from dead men, Frank, killed them and took what they'd marked as theirs. Maybe that means something. Maybe Gold does remember. Maybe he stopped because Jed Lowe had just walked in. If Murphy and Haynes looked bad, Jed looked worse. He'd lost weight, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that seemed to be shrinking in on itself. His eyes, always a little wrong, a little mad, now looked completely unhinged. He moved like a man in a dream or a nightmare, not quite connected to the physical world around him. He spotted them, walked over, sat down without being invited, stared at the coins spread on the table between Murphy and Haynes. You counting them? His voice was hoarse, cracked. I count mine every day, sometimes every hour. Have to make sure, have to keep track. Track of what, Jed? How many we killed? How many are coming back? He pulled out his own coins, started laying them out in patterns that made no sense to anyone but him. There were 8 people on that wagon. Driver, 2 guards, 5 passengers. We killed them all. 8 dead. But I keep finding new coins with new initials. 9 coins now. 10, 11, more every time I count. Jed, that don't make sense. We only killed 8 people. Did we? Jed looked up, and the madness in his eyes was mixed with something worse, a terrible clarity, a knowledge of something the others couldn't see. Maybe we didn't count right. Maybe some of them were pregnant. Maybe there were children hidden in the wagon. Maybe we killed more than we thought, and the gold is showing us the true count. Haynes pushed his chair back, suddenly desperate to be away from this conversation, away from these men, away from the gold that seemed to multiply like a disease. I can't do this. I can't sit here and... Where are you going to go? Murphy grabbed his arm. You think you can run from this? Cutter tried running. Cutter's dead. We're all dead, Frank. We just don't know it yet. Speak for yourself. Haynes jerked his arm free. I'm taking my gold and I'm leaving. Going east, back to civilization, where things make sense and dead men stay dead. They'll find you, Jed said calmly, still arranging his coins in incomprehensible patterns. The gold will find you. You can't spend it without them knowing. Can't bury it without it digging itself back up. Can't throw it away because it just comes back. I tried. Threw $100 worth into a canyon, watched it fall. Next morning it was in my saddlebags again. All of it. Plus 3 more coins I'd never seen before. Murphy was counting his own coins again, unable to stop himself, needing to know if any more had appeared in just the last few minutes. His count came up different than before. He counted again, different again. The numbers kept changing, kept adding up wrong, like the gold itself was multiplying while he watched. We need to get rid of it, he said suddenly. All of it. Melt it down. Destroy it. Something. Can't let it keep. I tried that too. Jed's voice was distant, dreamy. Found a blacksmith in Tucson. Paid him to melt down 50 coins. Watched him put them in the crucible. Watched the fire get hot enough to liquefy metal. But the gold... He paused, and a shiver ran through his whole body. The gold screamed when it melted. Human screams, women screaming, men screaming, children screaming. The blacksmith heard it too, dropped the crucible, ran out of his shop. The gold spilled across the floor, and it was red. Murphy. Not orange like molten metal should be. Red. Like blood. You're crazy, Jed. You've always been crazy, and now you're... Am I? Jed swept his coins off the table, let them scatter across the cantina floor. They rang as they fell, that pure tone that only gold makes, but underneath that tone was something else whispers. Dozens of voices whispering in harmony, too low to make out words but loud enough to hear if you were listening. Other patrons in the cantina were starting to notice the commotion, starting to watch with the wary interest of men who'd seen trouble brewing and wanted to know if they should leave or stay and watch the show. The bartender, a different man, in a different place, but wearing the same expression of tired concern that bartenders everywhere seemed to learn, was moving toward them with the clear intention of suggesting they take their business elsewhere. That's when Brig Holler walked in. The leader of the Blood Gold gang looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Gray had appeared in his beard that hadn't been there before. His face was lined deeper, his eyes haunted and bloodshot. He took in the scene, his 3 surviving men gathered around a table covered in gold coins, Jed on his hands and knees gathering up the pieces he'd scattered, other patrons watching with undisguised curiosity. "Outside," Brig said quietly. "Now." They gathered in the alley behind the cantina, the 4 of them, what was left of a gang that had been 5 strong. In the darkness, with the sounds of the town muffled and distant, they finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding. "Cutter's dead," Brig started. No preamble, no small talk. "Killed in Socorro over the payroll gold. You all heard, I assume?" Nods all around. "I heard he went for his knife, got shot by a bartender. Fair fight, or close enough." Brig paused. "But I also heard the bartender was the brother of one of the men we killed. And I heard the coin Cutter used to pay for his drink had that man's initials on it. You want to tell me how that's possible? How Cutter just happened to spend a coin that belonged to the brother of the man who killed him? It's not possible," Murphy said. Unless the gold wants us dead." Haynes's voice was hollow. "Unless it's hunting us, marking us, leading people to us." Brig wanted to scoff, wanted to dismiss this as superstitious nonsense from men whose nerves had cracked, but he couldn't, because he'd been seeing things too, hearing things, waking up in the night with the sensation of drowning, of water filling his lungs even though he was in a dry room in a dry town hundreds of miles from the nearest river. "Show me your gold," he ordered. "All of it, everything you got." They complied, pulling out coins from pockets and money belts and hidden compartments in their boots, poured it out in a pile that gleamed dully in the moonlight filtering into the alley. Brig knelt and started sorting, looking for the marked coins, the ones with initials carved into them. They were all marked. Every single coin, even the ones that Brig was certain hadn't been marked before, that had been smooth, blank gold when they divided the take. Now they all carried initials, T.W., and J.M. and R.G. and half a dozen others, names of the dead, carved into gold that should have been anonymous. And there, at the bottom of the pile, 3 coins that made Brig's blood run cold. M.C. Marcus Cutter, the man who died just weeks ago, now immortalized in the same gold he'd stolen, his initials joining the others on the list of the dead. "How many coins you got with Cutter's initials?" Brig asked quietly. 2, Haynes said. 3, Murphy admitted. "I got 4, Jed added, his voice dreamy and distant. Brig reached into his own pocket, pulled out his share, started counting, found 5 coins, marked M.C., 5 pieces of gold that carried the mark of a dead man, a man who died because of the very gold he now haunted. "That's 14 total," Murphy said, doing the math. 14 coins marked with Cutter's initials. But we only stole maybe 300 coins total, and we split them 5 ways. Shouldn't be possible to have 14 coins with the same mark. The numbers don't work." "The numbers haven't worked since the beginning," Briggs said grimly. "I count my share every night. Every night the count comes up different. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but always different. And there's always new initials, new marks, new names. It's not just about counting anymore," Jed said. He was rocking back and forth now, a motion that was both soothing and deeply disturbing. "It's about what comes next, about what happens when all the coins are marked, when every piece of gold carries a name. What happens then? Nobody wanted to answer that question. We need to split up," Haynes said suddenly. "Get as far from each other as possible. Maybe if we're not together it'll find us anyway," Murphy interrupted. "Splitting up didn't save Cutter. Won't save us either." Then what do we do? Haynes's voice was rising, panic breaking through. Just sit here and wait to die? Wait for some stranger to recognize a coin and put a bullet in us? Wait for the gold to what, exactly? What's it going to do? Kill us itself? As if in answer, one of the coins in the pile began to move. Slowly at first, just a slight trembling. Then more deliberately, sliding across the ground with no hand pushing it, no wind moving it. It moved in a straight line toward Briggs' boot, touched the leather, and stopped. The four men stared at it, frozen. Then another coin moved, and another. One by one, the gold pieces began to slide across the ground, all of them moving toward the same point, drawn by some invisible force. They piled up against Briggs' boot, stacking themselves in a neat column, defying gravity and reason and everything the men thought they understood about how the world worked. Jesus Christ, Murphy whispered, crossing himself, despite not having been inside a church since childhood. Jesus Christ, protect us. Briggs kicked at the pile, scattering the coins. They fell with that clear ringing sound, bounced, rolled, and then began to move again, inexorably, deliberately, crawling across the ground like insects returning to a nest. Some moved toward Briggs, some toward Murphy, some toward Haynes and Jed. Seeking them out, finding them. I'm leaving, Haynes announced, his voice cracking. I don't care what you say. I'm taking my share and I'm leaving. Going back east, back to Mary, back to... He never finished the sentence because Jed had pulled his pistol and was pointing it at Haynes's chest. Can't let you do that, Frank, Jed said calmly. Can't let any of us leave. We're in this together. We die together. That's how it has to be. Jed, put the gun down. Briggs' voice was carefully neutral, the tone you'd use with a spooked horse or a mad dog. Nobody's dying tonight. We're all on the same side here, are we? Jed's eyes were wild, unfocused. How do I know one of you didn't talk? Didn't tell someone about the job? Maybe one of you set Cutter up. Maybe one of you is planning to set the rest of us up, too. That's the fear talking, Jed. That's the gold messing with your head. Or maybe it's the truth. Jed swung the pistol. Toward Murphy now, then Briggs, then back to Haynes. Maybe I should kill all of you, take all the gold, be the last one standing. Then at least I'll know nobody can betray me. Jed, the gunshot was loud in the narrow alley, echoing off brick walls, making the four men's ears ring. But it wasn't Jed who'd fired. It was Haynes, his own pistol drawn and smoking, his hand steadier than it had been all night. Jed looked down at the hole in his chest, surprised, touched it with his free hand, brought his fingers away, wet and dark, looked back up at Haynes with an expression that might have been gratitude or might have been accusation. It was hard to tell with Jed, even at the best of times, and this was far from the best of times. 4 more, Jed said softly, his voice bubbling with blood. Tom said 4 more to go. Now it's 3. 3 more and then... He fell forward, hitting the ground hard, the pistol falling from his grip. The gold coins that had been moving toward him suddenly reversed direction, scattering away like they were repelled by his body. Within seconds, they'd disappeared into the shadows of the alley, vanishing so completely it was like they'd never been there at all. The 3 surviving members of the Blood Gold gang stood frozen, staring at the body of their companion, at the blood pooling beneath him, at the empty spaces where the coins had been. Self-defense, Briggs said finally. He drew on us. You defended yourself. Anyone asks, that's what happened. Haynes nodded mechanically. He was still holding his pistol, still pointing at where Jed had been standing. Murphy gently took it from him, eased the hammer down, handed it back. We need to go, Murphy said. Need to get out of this town before someone investigates that gunshot. They left Jed where he fell, left him for the sheriff or the undertaker or whoever found him first. It felt wrong, leaving a companion like that. But what else could they do? Staying would mean questions they couldn't answer, attention they couldn't afford. They split up right there in the alley, going in 3 different directions, each man clutching his cursed gold and wondering if he'd be the next to die. wondering if somewhere out there new coins were already being stamped with new initials. J.L. Jed Lowe. 2 men down, 3 to go. The gold was keeping count. And somewhere in the darkness, voices whispered and water dripped, and the dead remembered being alive, remembered being robbed, remembered being murdered. The blood gold gang was eating itself from the inside out. Fear and suspicion and supernatural dread turning them against each other faster than any posse could. And the gold just kept multiplying, kept marking itself, kept finding ways back to the men who'd stolen it. Some debts don't take long to come due. And the collection agents working for the dead, they never sleep, never quit, never forgive. 3 weeks after Jed Lowe died in that El Paso alley, Murphy found himself in Albuquerque with his nerves shredded and his sanity hanging by a thread. He'd been drinking heavy, sleeping light, and seeing things in the corners of his vision that vanished when he turned to look directly at them. The gold in his saddlebags seemed to get heavier every day, weighing him down both literally and spiritually. He'd stopped singing. That should have been the clearest sign something was wrong. Murphy had always been singing, humming, whistling, filling the air with music like other men filled it with breath. But the songs had died in his throat after El Paso, choked off by fear and guilt and the growing certainty that he was a dead man walking, just waiting for the gold to decide when and how to collect what he owed. He'd tried spending it, but every merchant he approached looked at the coins too long, asked too many questions about the initials carved into them. He'd tried trading it for paper money, but the banker he approached had gone pale and asked Murphy to leave, said those coins were marked as stolen property from the Silver Hill massacre. He'd tried simply abandoning it, leaving his saddlebags in a hotel room and walking away, but by nightfall the bags had appeared in his new room at a different hotel, the gold inside seemingly untouched. The coins wouldn't leave him, and more kept appearing in his pockets, in his boots, under his pillow. Every morning he'd wake up to find more gold than he'd had when he went to sleep, each new piece marked with initials he was starting to recognize. The 8 people from the original wagon, Marcus Cutter, Jed Lowe, and others he didn't know, couldn't identify, names that made no sense unless they'd killed more people than they remembered, unless there had been children in that wagon, or pregnant women, or folks they'd shot and forgotten about in the chaos. The gold was keeping the true count, the accurate tally of lives ended, and that count kept going up. Murphy had finally decided to destroy it, not bury it, not hide it, not try to spend it, destroy it. Melt it down to slag, pour it into the river, eliminate it from existence if such a thing was possible. Maybe if the gold ceased to exist in its current form, the curse would break. Maybe the dead would lose their connection to it. Maybe he could finally be free. He'd found a blacksmith named Santos on the edge of town, a Mexican man who asked few questions and charged reasonable rates. Murphy had shown him the gold, told him he wanted it melted down into one solid ingot, said he'd pay well for the service and the discretion. Santos had looked at the coins, looked at Murphy, and shaken his head. "These coins, senor, they are marked. This is not good gold. This is troubled gold, which is why I want it melted. Can you do it or not?" Santos had hesitated, his weathered face troubled. But Murphy had doubled his offer, then tripled it, until the money became too good to refuse. "Tomorrow night," Santos finally agreed. "When? The shop is closed and there are no other eyes. I will do this thing for you, but I do not like it. This gold, it feels wrong to touch." The next night Murphy returned to the forge with all his gold, every coin he'd accumulated, every piece that had appeared in his pockets and bags and boots. Maybe 200 coins total, more than his original share, more than made sense. He poured them out on Santos's workbench, and the blacksmith crossed himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. "This is blood gold," Santos said quietly. "I can feel it, can smell it. This gold has seen terrible things." "Just melt it," Murphy insisted. "Turn it into something else, something that ain't coins anymore." Santos built up his forge fire, pumping the bellows until the coals glowed white hot. The heat was intense, filling the small shop with shimmering waves that made the air dance and distort. He placed a large crucible in the heart of the fire and began feeding in the coins, one handful at a time. The gold melted slowly, reluctantly, as if it didn't want to change form. Santos had to work the bellows constantly, had to keep the temperature at its absolute peak, and even then the coins seemed to resist liquefying. Murphy watched from a safe distance, sweat pouring down his face from the heat, his hands gripping the edge of the workbench. When about half the coins were melted, Murphy heard it, a sound, faint at first, almost lost in the roar of the fire and the wheeze of the bellows, but growing louder, more distinct, more impossible to ignore. Voices, screaming voices, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all crying out in pain and terror and rage. Men's voices and women's voices and children's voices, all blending together into a chorus of agony that seemed to come from the crucible itself, from the molten gold swirling and bubbling in the intense heat. "Do you hear that?" Murphy shouted over the noise. Santos had stopped working the bellows, his face pale and terrified. "See, I hear it. Madre de Dios, I hear it." The screaming got louder. Not metaphorical screaming, not something they were imagining, actual human screaming pouring out of the forge like smoke, filling the shop, making both men clap their hands over their ears. But it didn't help. The sound seemed to bypass their ears entirely, resonating directly in their skulls, in their bones, in some deep part of them that understood on a primal level that they were hearing the voices of the dead. And then the gold began to change. The molten metal in the crucible, which should have been bright orange or yellow-white from the heat, began to turn red. Not the red-orange of heated metal, but the deep crimson of fresh blood. It bubbled and roiled like a living thing, and faces began to form on its surface, human faces, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with horror, hands reaching up as if trying to climb out of the crucible. "Stop!" Murphy yelled. "Stop! Get it out of the fire!" Santos grabbed his tongs with shaking hands, reached for the crucible. The moment the metal touched the red-hot container, he screamed and dropped the tongs. His hands were blistering, smoking, as if he'd touched something far hotter than the forge should have been able to produce. The crucible tipped over, spilling its contents across the forge floor. The liquid gold ran like blood, spreading in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like letters trying to form words. It pooled and swirled, and in that swirling Murphy saw them clearly now, the faces of the people they'd killed. The wagon driver with half his head blown off, the woman passenger who'd been holding a baby, the guards who'd tried to fight back, all of them staring up from the floor, their mouths moving in unison, speaking words Murphy couldn't hear but somehow understood. "You owe us. You owe us. You owe us." The shop was filling with smoke now, thick and choking, smelling of sulfur and burnt meat and something else, something like river, water, like mud, like the scent of death and decay. Murphy stumbled toward the door, coughing, his eyes streaming. Santos was already outside, on his knees in the dirt, retching and praying in rapid Spanish. Behind them, the forge gave a sound like a thunderclap. Murphy turned to see the remaining coins, the ones that hadn't been melted yet, rising into the air. Just floating up from the workbench where he'd left them, defying gravity, spinning in a slow circle about 6 feet off the ground. They orbited each other like planets, making that soft clinking sound. And in that sound Murphy could still hear the whispers, the voices, the accusations. Then they fell. All at once, like someone had cut their strings. They hit the ground and scattered, rolling in every direction, disappearing into the shadows of the shop and the darkness beyond. Murphy ran. Didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just ran. Ran down the street with Santos's screams fading behind him, ran until his lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out, ran until he couldn't run any more and collapsed against a wall in some nameless alley, gasping for air. When he finally caught his breath and checked his pockets, his heart sank. The coins were there, all of them. Every single piece he'd brought to the forge, cool to the touch now, unmarked by the fire that should have destroyed them. And there were new ones, too, 3 new coins he'd never seen before, each one marked with letters he recognized. J, L, Jed Lowe, M, C, Marcus Cutter, S, G, Santos Garcia. The blacksmith? Murphy stumbled back toward the forge, dreading what he might find but needing to know. The shop was dark now, the fire gone out, the door hanging open. He called out for Santos but got no answer. He found the blacksmith's body near the forge, his skin mottled and strange, lips blue like he'd drowned. But there was no water anywhere, no source for drowning, just a dead man lying on dry ground, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror, his hands clutched at his throat as if he'd been struggling for air that wouldn't come. The crucible lay on its side nearby, empty now, the gold that had been in it completely gone, and scratched into the dirt floor, in letters formed by what looked like drag marks from fingers or toes, was a message. 3 more Murphy fled Albuquerque that night, didn't even stop to get his horse or his belongings from the hotel. Just ran into the desert on foot, ran until the dawn came and found him miles from town, exhausted and terrified and still carrying the gold that wouldn't leave him alone. He knew the truth now, the terrible truth that Jed had tried to warn them about. You couldn't destroy the gold, couldn't spend it, couldn't bury it, couldn't give it away, couldn't melt it down. It was bound to them, bound by blood and murder and the names carved into its surface. It would follow them until the debt was paid, until justice, or something like justice, was satisfied. 3 men left now, Murphy, Haynes, and Brigg. 3 men with gold in their pockets and death at their heels. The coins had made their pronouncement clear. 3 more. 3 more deaths before the count was settled, before the books were balanced, before the voices stopped screaming from molten metal and the dead stopped walking. Murphy found a creek and drank deep, trying to wash away the taste of smoke and fear. When he looked down into the water, he saw his reflection gaunt and hollow-eyed, looking 10 years older than he had a month ago. And behind his reflection, standing on the bank behind him, he saw them. 8 figures, maybe more, dripping wet despite the dry desert air, their clothes tattered and stained, their faces pale and accusing. The people from the wagon, the people they'd killed. Standing there silent and patient and inevitable, Murphy spun around, but the bank was empty, just rocks and sand and scrub brush. When he looked back at the water, they were gone from his reflection, too. But he could still feel them watching, still feel their presence pressing in around him, waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right circumstance to collect what they were owed. He pulled out his pistol not to shoot at ghosts but to shoot himself, to end this, to deny them the satisfaction of hunting him down. But his hand wouldn't do it. His finger wouldn't pull the trigger. Some deep survival instinct overrode his fear and his despair, forcing him to keep living, keep running, keep trying to escape what couldn't be escaped. The gold clinked softly in his pocket as he walked, a constant reminder of what he'd done and what was coming. And if he listened close, really close, he could hear them in that clinking. The voices, the names, the tally being kept by metal that remembered everything. Marcus Cutter, shot in Socorro. Jed Lowe, shot in El Paso. Santos Garcia, drowned on dry land in Albuquerque. 3 down, 3 to go. The Blood Gold Gang's reckoning was approaching its conclusion, and Murphy knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't see another month. None of them would. The gold had made its judgment, and the gold always collected its debts. Always. Brig Holler had always prided himself on being a survivor. In 15 years of outlaw life, he'd dodged bullets and lawmen and bad luck more times than he could count. He'd seen partners die, seen gangs fall apart, seen the best laid plans go to hell, and he'd always managed to slip away, always managed to land on his feet. That's what leaders did. That's what made them leaders. But now, alone in a rented room above a cantina in Las Cruces, with Murphy and Haynes both gone silent, and the gold coins spread across his bed like evidence at a trial, Brigg had to admit the truth. He wasn't going to survive this. Whatever was happening, curse or coincidence or cosmic justice, it was bigger than him, stronger than him, more patient than him. The coins told the story. He'd been counting them every night for weeks now, documenting the changes, trying to understand the pattern. He'd started with maybe $600 in gold. Now he had closer to 1,000, and every new coin that appeared carried initials, the original victims, Cutter, Jed, and 3 days ago, new initials had appeared, M.M. Michael Murphy. The Irishman was dead, though Brigg didn't know how or where. He just knew, the way you know the sun will rise or winter will come inevitable and certain. That left two, himself and Frank Haynes, two survivors of a gang that had been 5 strong, all of them marked for death by gold, that kept score better than any ledger. Brigg had tried everything. He'd paid a priest to bless the coins the priest had refused after touching one, said it burned his fingers like hot iron even though it was cool to the touch. He'd thrown handfuls of gold into a well, listened to them splash into water far below, only to find them back in his saddlebags by morning. He'd even tried leaving them with a prostitute, told her they were payment, and she could keep them all. She'd died that same night, throat cut by a customer, and the gold had come back to Brigg still speckled with her blood. The gold wanted him, wanted them all, and it wouldn't stop until it had them. So Brigg made a decision. If he was going to die anyway, if this was inevitable and inescapable, then he'd die on his own terms. He'd make one last ride, one final attempt to outrun the curse or die trying. And if the gold wanted to follow him, wanted to drag along for the journey to his death, then so be it. At least he wouldn't go down passive, wouldn't sit in some rented room waiting for the knock on the door or the whisper in the darkness. He packed his saddlebags with everything he owned, the gold, supplies, ammunition, a bottle of good whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. He settled his affairs, paid his debts, even wrote a letter to his sister back in Kansas that he hadn't spoken to in 10 years, told her he was sorry for the life he'd lived, sorry for the shame he'd brought on the family name, sorry he wouldn't be coming home. He didn't mention the gold or the curse or the reason he knew he'd be dead within the week, just signed it, "Your brother, Brigg," and left it with the cantina owner to mail. Then he rode out, heading south toward the border, toward Mexico, and whatever lay beyond. He had some vague idea that if he could just get far enough away, cross enough miles, put enough distance between himself and the places where the blood had been spilled, maybe then the gold would lose its hold. Maybe the voices would fade. Maybe the dead would stop following. It was a fool's hope, and Brigg knew it, but it was all he had left. He rode hard that first day, pushing his horse until the animal was lathered and blowing, until the sun was setting behind him and the desert stretched out empty and endless ahead. Made camp that night in the shadow of the Oregon mountains, built a small fire, ate cold beans from a tin. The gold sat heavy in his saddlebags, and he could swear he heard it shifting, moving, rearranging itself when he wasn't looking directly at it. Sleep came hard and brought dreams worse than waking. He dreamed of the payroll wagon, but this time when they opened fire, the victims didn't die. They just stood there, absorbing bullets, blood pouring from wounds that should have killed them but didn't. They walked toward him, arms outstretched, mouths open in silent accusations. And when they grabbed him, when their cold, wet hands closed around his arms and throat, he woke up gasping, his blanket soaked with sweat despite the cool desert night. The fire had gone out while he slept. And sitting on the other side of the dead coals, illuminated by moonlight, was a figure. Brigg's hand went for his pistol, but the figure didn't move. Just sat there, patient and still, and after a moment Brigg's eyes adjusted enough to make out details. It was a man in rough mining clothes. His hat was pulled low, but Brigg could see enough of his face to know he'd never seen this person before in life. The man's clothes were wet, water dripping onto the dry ground, though there was no water source for miles. "Who are you?" Brigg managed, his voice hoarse. The figure didn't answer, just raised one hand and pointed not at Brigg but south, toward where Brigg was heading, toward Mexico. The gesture was clear. "Keep going. We're not done yet." Then the figure stood and walked away, movement stiff and unnatural, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camp. Brigg listened for footsteps, for any sound of departure, but heard nothing. Just silence and his own ragged breathing and the distant howl of a coyote that sounded almost like human laughter. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just sat with his back against a rock and his pistol in his lap, watching the darkness, waiting for dawn. The next town he passed through was small and nameless, just a cluster of adobe buildings around a well. He stopped to water his horse and buy supplies, keeping his head down, not making conversation. But the woman running the general store looked at him with eyes that seemed to see too much. "You're being followed, senor," she said quietly as she bagged his purchases. "What? By who?" "I cannot say who, but I can see it on you. Death walks behind you. Death and water and old debts." She crossed herself. "You should go to a church, confess your sins. Make peace while you still can." Brigg threw money on the counter and left without responding, but as he mounted his horse, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were wet footprints on the dry ground leading from the well to where his horse was tied. Boot prints, man-sized, appearing and disappearing like someone was walking invisibly beside him. He spurred his horse into a gallop, leaving the town behind in a cloud of dust, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave. If anything, it got stronger. He could feel eyes on him constantly now, could sense presence just beyond his peripheral vision, and every town he passed through, every settlement, every ranch, every lonely roadhouse, there would be a fresh grave. Not old graves from the cemetery, new graves. Unmarked mounds of fresh-turned earth that hadn't been there when he arrived but appeared overnight, as if the ground itself was preparing for what was coming. 5 days into his ride, Brigg's horse started acting strange. It would shy away from certain spots on the trail for no visible reason, would refuse to drink from certain streams even though it was clearly thirsty. Animals could sense things humans couldn't, Brigg knew, and whatever his horse was sensing, it was getting stronger, closer, more present. On the 6th day, he found the graves waiting for him at every stop. At a water hole, a fresh grave. At a grove of cottonwoods where he stopped to rest, 2 fresh graves. At a ruined adobe where he sheltered from the afternoon sun, 3 fresh graves, arranged in a row like soldiers waiting for inspection. The 7th day, his saddlebags split open, just tore apart at the seams like they'd been cut, even though Brigg had inspected them that morning and they'd been sound. The gold spilled out onto the ground, hundreds of coins scattering across the desert floor, and they were all marked now, every single one. No blank coins left, no anonymous gold, just initials carved into metal, hundreds of names Brigg didn't recognize, people he'd never known but had somehow wronged. The true count of their crime, perhaps. Not just the 8 people on the wagon, but everyone connected to them, family members who'd died of grief, children who'd grown up without parents, widows who'd starved without their husbands' wages. The gold was showing him the full weight of what they'd done, and it was heavier than any man could carry. Brigg left the gold, where it fell, just walked away from it, left his horse grazing nearby, and started walking on foot into the desert. He had maybe a canteen of water, no food, no real plan, just the need to be away from that cursed gold, to separate himself from it, even if it meant dying of thirst in the wasteland. He made it maybe 5 miles before he collapsed. The sun was merciless, the heat crushing. His lips cracked, his tongue swelled, his vision started to blur. This was it, he thought. This was how it ended. Not with a bullet or a rope, but dying of thirst in the desert like a fool who'd lost his way. But when he woke up, and he did wake up, unfortunately he was lying next to a water source. A spring bubbling up from the rocks, clear and cold and impossible. There was no spring here. He'd ridden this country before, knew it well. This area was bone dry, had been dry for 1,000 years, and sitting next to the impossible spring, arranged in a neat circle, were his gold coins. All of them, every single piece he'd left scattered 5 miles back. Brigg started laughing then, a sound that held no humor, only hysteria and despair. You couldn't leave it. couldn't abandon it. The gold would follow, would provide what you needed to survive just so it could keep you alive long enough to collect its due. It was the cruelest mercy imaginable. He drank from the spring. What choice did he have? And the water tasted like river water, like the Pecos, like the water that had been dripping from those ghostly figures all along. It wasn't a spring at all, he realized. It was them, the dead, providing water from the river where they'd drowned or been drowned or somehow ended up, keeping him alive for reasons he didn't want to contemplate. When he stood up, dizzy and weak, he saw his horse waiting nearby, and beyond the horse, a line of figures, 8 of them, maybe more, standing silent and patient in the desert heat, their clothes dripping water that evaporated before it hit the ground, their faces pale and accusing, the wagon victims, the original dead. They'd been following him all along, waiting for the right moment, the right place. And now, here in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses and no escape, they'd caught up. Brigg drew his pistol, useless gesture, but what else could he do? He fired at the closest figure. The bullet passed through without effect, without even making the figure flinch. He fired again and again, until the hammer clicked on empty chambers, and he was standing there with a smoking gun that had accomplished nothing. The figures moved closer, slowly, deliberately, taking their time. They had all the time in the world. Time meant nothing to the dead. Brigg turned and ran deeper into the desert, away from the spring, away from the gold, away from the patient dead. He ran until his legs gave out, until his heart felt like it would burst, until he collapsed face first into the sand and couldn't get up again. And the figures kept coming. He could hear them now, not footsteps exactly, but the sound of water dripping, of wet cloth dragging across dry ground, of breath that shouldn't exist but did. They surrounded him, formed a circle, looked down at him with eyes that held no mercy and no malice, just an implacable need for balance. "You owe us," they said, though their mouths didn't move. "The debt must be paid." "I'm sorry," Brigg gasped out. Maybe the first time he'd said those words and meant them. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't balance the books. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. Only death balances death." The sand beneath Brigg began to move, shifting, swirling, pulling him down like quicksand, even though the desert floor should have been solid. He clawed at the ground, trying to find purchase, but his fingers closed on nothing. The sand was swallowing him, pulling him down inch by inch, and he couldn't stop it. As his vision started to darken, as the sand closed over his head and filled his mouth and nose, the last thing Brigg saw was gold coins raining down around him, falling like drops of water, burying him along with the sand, marking his grave with the wealth he'd killed for. They found his body 3 weeks later. A prospector stumbled across it, or what was left of it after the scavengers had done their work. The body was half buried in sand, picked clean by birds and coyotes, bleached white by the sun, but the gold was still there, scattered around the corpse, glinting in the sunlight. Hundreds of coins, maybe more, each one marked with initials. The prospector gathered them up, thinking he'd struck it rich. Found himself a fortune just lying in the desert. He made it back to town and tried to spend one in a saloon. The bartender looked at the initials, looked at the prospector, and started asking questions. Within a day, word had spread. The blood gold, the cursed coins from the payroll wagon massacre. People crossed themselves when they heard about it, refused to touch the coins even when the prospector tried to give them away. By the end of the week, the prospector was dead, thrown from his horse, broke his neck in a fall that shouldn't have killed him but did. The gold scattered again. Some of it ended up in a church poor box, some in a bank vault, some just disappeared into the desert where men would find it and die and it would disappear again. The cycle continuing, endless and patient, because the debt wasn't fully paid yet. 2 men down from the original gang, Cutter and Jed, killed by human hands. 2 more Murphy and Brigg killed by whatever force animated that cursed gold. That left one, Frank Haynes, the last surviving member of the Blood Gold Gang, the weakest link, the one who'd never wanted to be there in the first place, the one who'd carried a tintype of his wife and had hesitated before pulling the trigger. He was still out there somewhere, still running, still carrying his share of the gold, still waiting for death to find him the way it had found all the others, and find him it would. The gold always found them. It was just a matter of time. Frank Haynes made it farther than any of the others, made it all the way to street. Louis, back to civilization, back to streets with names and buildings with numbers and laws that actually got enforced. He'd been traveling for months, moving only at night, avoiding main roads, paying in silver or paper money he'd traded for in small towns where nobody asked too many questions. He'd left the gold behind, all of it, buried it in the desert, thrown it in rivers, given it to beggars, left it in hotel rooms, got rid of every coin he could find, searched his belongings obsessively, turned out every pocket and checked every seam. He was free of it. Had to be. He'd been so careful, but still he heard them at night, the whispers, the clinking, the soft sound of coins shifting in bags that weren't there. And every morning he'd find them, just a few at first, then more. Gold coins appearing in his pockets, in his boots, under his pillow. No matter how many times he threw them away, they came back, patient and persistent, like a debt collector who knew you'd eventually run out of places to hide. He found his wife, Mary, living in a boarding house on the north side of the city. She'd given up on him years ago, had told everyone he was dead, had even worn mourning black for a respectable period. When he showed up at her door, thin and haunted and desperate, she barely recognized him. "Frank," her voice was uncertain, like she was seeing a ghost. "Frank, is that really you?" "It's me, Mary. I know I ain't been. I know I left you, and I'm sorry, but I need help. I need." She let him in, though everything in her expression said she was regretting it, even as she stepped back from the door. He told her everything. The robbery, the murders, the gold, the curse. Told her about Cutter and Jed and Murphy and Brigg, all of them dead now, all of them killed by the very gold they'd stolen. Told her he was next, that he could feel it coming, that he had maybe days or hours left, and he just wanted to see her one more time before the end. Mary listened, her face growing paler with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You killed people, Frank. You murdered them for money. I know. God help me, I know. And I've been paying for it every day since. We'll pay for it until you're dead too." Her voice was flat. "That's what you're saying, that you're cursed, that you're going to die, and you came here to what? Say goodbye? Get forgiveness? Make peace? I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. I wanted to see you. Wanted you to know I was sorry. For everything. For leaving. For the life I lived. For not being the man you deserved." Mary stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street below. "There's a church 3 blocks from here. Street Anthony's. Father O'Brien is a good man, listens to confessions every afternoon. You should go there. Tell him what you told me. Maybe he can help." "Mary, I can't help you, Frank. I don't know how. I don't even know if I want to. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Or die with them." She turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I did love you once. Part of me probably still does. But I can't save you from this. Nobody can." Haynes left her boarding house and walked the streets of Street Lewis in a daze. He'd imagined this reunion differently, had thought somehow that seeing Mary would make things better, would give him strength or hope or something to hold on to. But she was right. She couldn't save him. He was beyond saving. He found Street Anthony's church as the sun was setting, its spire cutting a dark shape against the orange sky. Father O'Brien was an older man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly, palsy maybe, or just age. He listened to Frank's Astenset confession in a small booth that smelled of incense and old wood, and he didn't interrupt, didn't gasp or judge or offer platitudes. When Frank finished, the priest was quiet for a long moment. "My son," he finally said, "I've heard many confessions in my 30 years as a priest. Sins of every kind, adultery, theft, violence, despair. But this is something different. This speaks to forces beyond my understanding. Can you help me, Father? Can you? Is there something, some prayer or blessing, or I can offer you absolution for your sins, can pray for your soul? But the curse you describe, if it's real, and I believe you when you say it is, that's not something a simple blessing can break. That requires the kind of penance that can only be paid in blood or in life changed completely. I don't have time to change my life. It's coming for me, Father. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but soon. Father O'Brien was quiet again. Then he said, "There's an old tradition from the medieval period. When a man was cursed or possessed, when evil had attached itself to him, the church would sometimes perform a ritual of transference, move the curse from the man to an object, then destroy the object. It didn't always work. Often it made things worse. But in cases of true desperation, I'll try anything." They spent that night in the church basement. Frank and Father O'Brien and 2 other priests the old man trusted enough to bring into this strange business. They lit candles, said prayers in Latin, burned sage and sweet grass. They took every gold coin Frank had, and he had dozens despite throwing them all away multiple times, and placed them in an iron box inscribed with holy symbols. The ritual went on for hours. The priest chanting, Frank kneeling before the altar, the candles burning down to stubs. And slowly, gradually, Frank felt something change, felt a weight lifting, a presence withdrawing. The whispers in his head grew fainter. The sensation of being watched, being followed, being marked, it diminished. When dawn light started filtering through the church's stained glass windows, Father O'Brien sealed the iron box and locked it with a key he wore around his neck. "The curse is contained," he said, though he looked exhausted and uncertain. "For now, at least. The coins cannot reach you while they're in this box, blessed and sealed. But Frank," he gripped Haynes's shoulder, "you must never go near this box again. Never try to open it. Never even think about the gold inside. The separation must be complete and permanent." "I won't," Frank promised. "I swear it. I just want to be free, want to start over." He left the church feeling lighter than he had in months. Went back to Mary's boarding house, knocked on her door, told her he'd confessed and done penance and been freed from the curse. Asked if there was any chance at all, that they could try again. Start fresh, build something new from the ruins of what they'd had. Mary looked at him for a long time, looked at his face, thinner and harder than it had been when she'd married him. Looked at his eyes, haunted but sincere. Looked at his hands, clean now but stained forever with blood she couldn't see. "I need time," she finally said. "Need to think about this. You can stay in Street Louis, find work, prove you've changed. If you're still here in 6 months, still living right, not drinking or gambling or going back to your old ways, then maybe we can try." It was more than Frank had hoped for. He got a job at a warehouse, loading and unloading freight. Honest work, hard work, the kind that left him too tired at the end of the day to think about gold or curses or dead men's faces in his dreams. He found a room in a cheap boarding house, paid his rent on time, went to church every Sunday, became gradually a different person than he'd been. 6 months passed, then a year. Mary started letting him court her again, awkward dinners, stiff conversations, the slow rebuilding of trust that had been shattered. They were married again, a quiet ceremony with just a few witnesses, Father O'Brien presiding, no mention of their previous marriage or the years between. Frank never talked about the Blood Gold gang, never mentioned his old partners or the payroll wagon or the curse that had killed them all. He put it behind him, buried it as deep as those coins were buried in their iron box in the church basement, built a new life on top of the old one, like building a house over a graveyard and hoping the dead stay quiet. For 15 years, it worked. Frank and Mary had 3 children, bought a small house on the edge of the city, lived quietly and decently. Frank worked his way up to foreman at the warehouse, earned respect, became the kind of man people nodded to on the street. His past seemed truly past, dead and buried and done with. But the gold never forgot. Father O'Brien died in 1891, and with his death the protections he'd maintained began to weaken. The new priest at Street, Anthony's, knew nothing about the iron box in the basement, didn't know to say the prayers that kept the seal strong, didn't understand that some things need constant vigilance, or they start to slip free. The box began to rust, the lock began to corrode, and inside the coins began to move. Frank started having the dreams again, started hearing whispers at night, started finding coins in his pockets that shouldn't be there. One coin at first, easy to explain away as loose change he'd forgotten about, then more, then dozens. The gold was coming back, working its way free from the consecrated prison where it had been contained, seeking the last man who owed it a debt. He went back to the church, found the new priest, a young man named Father Doyle, who looked at Frank like he was crazy when he tried to explain about the box and the curse and the need to maintain the seal. The young priest had never heard of such a thing, said it sounded like superstition, like folk magic, not proper Catholic doctrine. Please, Frank begged, just check. Go to the basement, look for an iron box with symbols on it, check if it's still sealed. Father Doyle humored him, went to look, came back shaking his head. There's no iron box in the basement, just old furniture and dusty records. Whatever you think was there, it's gone now. Frank knew what that meant. The box had corroded through, or been thrown away, or simply ceased to hold what needed holding. The gold was free, and it was coming for him. He didn't tell Mary, didn't want to frighten her, didn't want his children to know about their father's past. Just started carrying a pistol, just started looking over his shoulder, just started counting the days and wondering which one would be his last. The end came on a Tuesday, unremarkable and ordinary. Frank was walking home from work, taking his usual route through the city streets. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. Church bells were ringing somewhere, calling the faithful to evening vespers. Children were playing in the street, their laughter bright and innocent. Frank turned a corner and there they were, standing in an alley, blocking his path. 8 figures, maybe more. Some wore the rough clothes of miners, others the faded uniforms of security guards. All of them were wet, water dripping from their clothes, pooling on the cobblestones despite the dry evening air. He recognized them, the wagon victims, the original dead. They'd found him at last, tracked him across years and miles and the life he'd tried to build on top of their graves. Frank didn't run. What was the point? He'd been running for 17 years, and here they were anyway. You couldn't outrun the dead. You couldn't hide from gold that remembered. You couldn't build a new life strong enough to keep the old one buried forever. I'm sorry, he said to them, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I've been sorry every day since it happened. I've tried to live right, tried to be better than I was. I know it don't make up for what I did, but it's all I got. The figures didn't respond, just moved closer, their movements still stiff and unnatural, their faces expressionless. Frank closed his eyes, said a prayer not for salvation. He was beyond that, but for Mary and the children. Asked God to take care of them, to not let his sins fall on them, to let the curse end with him. He waited for hands to grab him, for water to fill his lungs, for whatever death the cursed gold had planned. But nothing happened. He opened his eyes, and the alley was empty. The figures were gone. Just him standing alone in the fading light, with no explanation for what had just. Pain hit him like a hammer to the chest, sharp, crushing, radiating down his left arm and up into his jaw. His heart was Frank Haynes collapsed on the cobblestones, clutching his chest, gasping for air that wouldn't come. A few people nearby saw him fall, came running to help, but there was nothing they could do. His heart gave out before the doctor could arrive, stopped beating like it had forgotten how or why it should keep going. They found gold coins in his pockets when they searched his body, dozens of them, marked with initials, warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. The police tried to trace where they'd come from, tried to figure out if Frank had stolen them or was carrying them for some illegal purpose, but the investigation went nowhere. The coins were just coins, old and worn and marked in ways that seemed random and meaningless to anyone who didn't know the story. Mary claimed the body, buried her husband in a Catholic cemetery on the edge of the city. Father Doyle said the words, spoke about how Frank had been a good man, a devoted husband, a loving father. Didn't mention the past. Frank had tried to escape, the gang he'd ridden with, the people he'd killed. Just focused on the 15 years of decent living, on the man Frank had become rather than the man he'd been. But at the burial, something strange happened. As they were lowering the coffin into the ground, coins began to fall from the sky. Gold coins raining down like hail, bouncing off the coffin lid, pinging off headstones, rolling across the grass. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all marked with initials, all warm despite the cold October air. The mourners scattered, thinking it was some kind of prank or protest. But the coins kept falling, kept accumulating, until Frank's open grave was half filled with gold instead of earth. When they finally stopped falling, just suddenly ceased, like someone had turned off a faucet, the cemetery workers didn't know what to do. They couldn't bury the coffin under gold coins. It wasn't proper. It wasn't right. In the end, they gathered up all the coins, 3 full bags worth, and took them to the police station. Nobody wanted to touch them after that. Nobody wanted to be responsible for cursed gold that fell from the sky and marked graves with itself. The police stored them in an evidence locker, figuring eventually someone would claim them or they'd figure out what to do with them. But the coins didn't stay in the evidence locker. Within a week, they'd disappeared. Just gone. Vanished overnight despite locked doors and guards and all the security the police could muster. Some blamed theft, some blamed corruption. But the older officers, the ones who'd been around long enough to hear strange stories, they knew better. The gold had moved on. Found new hands to haunt, new debts to collect, new purposes to serve, because that's what cursed gold does. It doesn't disappear, doesn't stop, doesn't forgive. It just keeps moving, keeps circulating, keeps collecting what it's owed from anyone foolish enough or desperate enough to touch it. Over the years, stories spread, stories about the blood gold, the coins from the payroll wagon massacre that brought death to anyone who possessed them. Prospectors would find coins in the desert and die within days. Gamblers would win them in poker games and lose everything: fortune, family, life itself. Collectors would buy them for their historical value and have accidents so unlikely they couldn't possibly be coincidence. The church tried to track them down, tried to gather them up and lock them away in consecrated ground or destroy them completely. But the coins were too scattered, too good at hiding, too patient. For every one they found, 10 more would turn up somewhere else, gleaming in the dust, waiting for the next person to think they'd gotten lucky. Newspapers wrote about it sometimes, usually as a curiosity piece or a warning about frontier superstitions. The curse of the blood gold became a story told to scare children, to warn against greed, to remind people that some treasures carry prices too high to pay. But the people who'd actually encountered the cursed gold, who'd held those warm coins, seen those initials, felt that unnatural weight, they knew it wasn't superstition. They knew the gold was real, the curse was real, the debt it demanded was real as blood and bone and death. The blood gold gang died to the last man. Took 17 years from the robbery to Frank Haynes's heart attack, but they all died. Some quick, some slow, but all of them marked by the gold they'd stolen, all of them collected on by the dead they'd created, and the gold lived on. Still lives on, probably, scattered across the Southwest in pockets and purses and bank vaults, each coin carrying its burden of initials and memory and terrible purpose, waiting for the next person to find it, waiting for the next debt to need collecting. Because gold remembers, partner. Gold always remembers. The fire's burned down to coals now, glowing soft and red in the darkness. The wind's picked up, carrying the smell of rain that probably won't reach us and the sound of distance that seems to go on forever out. Here in the canyon country, my throat's dry from talking, and the night's gotten cold the way desert nights do, that sharp cold that reminds you how thin the line is between the warmth of the day and the emptiness of the void. You've been quiet through this whole tale, and I appreciate that. Some stories need to be heard without interruption, need to flow from beginning to end, like water finding its course. This is one of those stories, the kind that makes you think about things you'd rather not think about, that asks questions you'd rather not answer. The Blood Gold Gang. 5 men who thought they could take what they wanted and ride away clean, thought murder was just business, thought gold was just metal, thought the dead stayed dead and the past stayed past. They learned different, didn't they? Learned it hard and learned it slow, each one dying in ways that made witnesses question what they'd seen and lawmen close cases they couldn't explain. Some folks hearing this story, they'll say it's just coincidence. That Cutter got shot in a bar fight that had nothing to do with curses. That Jed was already crazy and got himself killed for it. That Murphy died in an accident involving molten metal, tragic, but these things happen. That Brigg got lost in the desert and died of exposure, and that Frank Haynes simply had a bad heart that gave out when his time came. All reasonable explanations, all perfectly logical, all missing the point entirely. Because the truth isn't in the individual deaths, partner. The truth is in the pattern, in the way the gold kept appearing no matter how many times they threw it away, in the way each man was found with coins in his pockets marked with the names of the dead, in the way witnesses kept reporting impossible things, figures that dripped water in the desert, voices that screamed from molten metal, coins that moved on their own. You can explain away each piece if you want, but when you put them all together, when you see the whole picture, well, that's when you start to wonder if maybe the world works a little different than we like to pretend it does. If maybe there are forces we don't understand, debts that get collected in ways we can't explain, justice that operates on a timeline longer and stranger than anything a courtroom could manage. The old-timers out here, the ones who've spent their whole lives in the territories, they don't question stories like this. They've seen too much, heard too much, felt too much of the strangeness that lives in the empty places. They know the desert keeps its secrets but also tells its truths, that the mountains remember everything, that gold does things metal shouldn't be able to do when enough blood's been spilled to take it. I've met men who swear they've found the blood gold, found coins marked with initials, felt that unnatural warmth, heard whispers in languages they didn't speak. Most of them threw those coins away fast, didn't want nothing to do with cursed metal no matter how much it was worth. But some, there's always some, they kept them, figured the curse was just a story, just superstition, just old wives' tales told to scare children. Those men are dead now. All of them. Some died quick, some died slow, but they all died in ways that made people whisper and wonder and check over their shoulders when they handled money that came from unknown sources. Maybe gold ain't cursed at all, like I said at the start. Maybe it just shows a man what's already inside him, shows him his greed, his willingness to take what ain't his capacity for violence and selfishness and putting his own desires above other people's lives. The Blood Gold Gang didn't become evil when they stole that gold. They were already evil, already willing to murder for profit. The gold just made it clear, made it visible, made it impossible to hide from what they were and what they'd done. Or maybe, and this is what bothers me most when I think about this story late at Paradisa night, maybe the gold really does remember. Maybe metal can hold on to things the same way wood holds on to memories in the rings of a tree, the way stone holds on to heat from the sun. Maybe when you stamp your initials into gold, when you mark it as yours, when you sweat and bleed and die with that gold clutched in your fingers, maybe part of you stays with it, stays attached, stays aware enough to know when someone takes it without permission, when someone kills to possess it, when injustice demands balancing. I don't know which explanation is true. Don't know if I want to know, honestly. Some mysteries are better left mysterious, some questions better left unasked. What I do know is this: the blood gold is still out there, scattered across the Southwest, buried in the sand, hidden in caves, sitting in collections where people don't know what they've got. Every few years you hear about someone finding coins marked with initials, old gold from the frontier days, pretty as you please and worth good money to the right buyer. And every few years you hear about those same people having accidents, car crashes on straight roads, falls from heights that shouldn't be fatal but are, heart attacks in men too young for heart problems, drownings in places with no water nearby. The pattern continues, patient and inexorable, collecting debts that don't expire and balancing books that never close. I toss a coin into the fire now, you see me do it, and it sits there on the coals, catching the red glow, getting hot but not melting. Just a regular silver dollar from my pocket, nothing special, nothing cursed. But in the way it catches the light, in the way the fire seems to whisper around it, you can almost imagine what it would be like if that coin carried names and memories and the weight of unpaid debts. It hisses once moisture escaping, perfectly normal, and then it's gone, kicked into the coals where I can't see it anymore, lost in the fire, like so many things get lost out here in the empty places, but not really gone, never really gone, just waiting to be found again, to tell its story again, to remind whoever finds it that some things don't stay buried no matter how deep you dig the hole. The wind sighs through the canyon, and if you listen close, really close, you can almost hear it. The soft clink of metal on metal, the whisper of coins shifting in bags that aren't there. The sound of debts being tallied by hands that rotted away decades ago but somehow keep counting, keep tracking, keep knowing who owes what and when payments due. The blood gold gang is dead. Been dead for over 50 years, if you go by when Frank Haynes's heart gave out on that street, Lewis Street. But their story lives on, gets told around campfires like this one, gets passed from one generation to the next, not as entertainment, though it serves that purpose, but as warning, as reminder, as truth wrapped up in a tale that sounds too strange to be real, but is more real than the history books will ever admit. You ever wonder if gold remembers? I asked you at the start. Now you got your answer, or close to one as anyone can get. Gold remembers everything, the hands that held it, the blood that bought it, the deaths it caused, the debts it's owed. And when men spill blood to take what ain't theirs, when they murder and steal and think they're above consequence, the gold keeps count, keeps score, keeps working toward that final reckoning when the books get balanced and justice gets served, even if it takes years, even if it takes decades, even if it has to reach beyond death to make things right. That's the curse of the blood gold, partner. Not that it brings bad luck or causes accidents or attracts misfortune. The curse is simpler and deeper than that. It makes sure the guilty pay. It makes sure murder don't go unanswered. It makes sure that somewhere, sometime, in this world or whatever comes after, accounts get settled and debts come due. You can call that supernatural if you want. Can call it coincidence, or karma, or divine justice, or just the universe maintaining balance in ways we don't fully understand. The name don't matter. The force behind it don't matter. What matters is the lesson, clear as the stars above us and cold as the night air pressing in. Some things can't be taken without cost. Some debts can't be avoided. Some gold carries weight that has nothing to do with how much it's worth and everything to do with how it was gotten. The campfire's about gone now. Just embers remaining, giving off more memory of heat than actual warmth. Time to let the darkness have its due, to stop fighting the night and accept that some things belong to shadow and silence. Time to sleep, if sleep will come. Time to rest, if rest is possible after hearing about dead men walking and gold that whispers and justice that operates outside the bounds of courtrooms and laws. Thank you for listening, partner, for sitting here in the cold and the dark while an old man told you about 5 outlaws and the gold that killed them, for not interrupting, not questioning, just letting the story flow the way it needs to flow. These tales, they're fragile things. They need respect to survive, need belief to maintain their power, Need listeners who understand that not everything can be explained away with logic and reason. I hope you'll remember this story. Hope you'll tell it to someone else someday, around another fire, in another lonely place. Keep it alive. Keep the warning alive. Because there's always someone who needs to hear it, someone tempted by easy money, someone willing to compromise their principles for profit, someone thinking they can take what they want and ride away clean. Those people need to know the gold remembers, the dead remember, and sooner or later, in ways both strange and terrible, the debts come due. Now get yourself some sleep. Morning comes early in the desert, and the sun don't care how late you stayed up, or what stories kept you awake. Tomorrow's another day, with its own trails to ride and its own tales to tell. But tonight belongs to the Blood Gold Gang and the curse they couldn't outrun. Sleep well, partner. And if you dream of coins falling from the sky, of water dripping in dry places, of figures standing just beyond the firelight, well, that's just your mind working through what you've heard. Just stories making themselves at home in your head. Nothing to worry about, nothing at all, unless you happen to find a gold coin marked with initials. Unless you happen to pick it up and feel that unnatural warmth. Unless you happen to hear whispers in the clinking metal or see faces in melted gold. Then you might want to remember this story real quick. Might want to drop that coin and walk away. Might want to leave some things buried where they lay and some gold unclaimed, no matter how much it's worth. Because the blood gold is still out there, still waiting, still remembering, still collecting its debts one way or another from anyone foolish enough to think they've gotten lucky. The fire's dead now. The coals are dark. And somewhere out in that vast darkness, coins are moving through the world, finding their way to new hands, marking new debts, waiting for the right moment to remind us all that justice delayed ain't justice denied, just justice taking its time, being patient, knowing that in the end, the guilty always pay. Good night, partner. May your dreams be peaceful and your pockets empty of cursed gold. And if you wake up with coins that weren't there when you went to sleep, well, best not to think about that. Best to sleep while you can, rest while it's still possible, exist in this moment before the world gets complicated again. The canyon's dark and silent now, the stars are cold and distant, and the story of the Blood Gold Gang drifts away on the wind, carried to other listeners, other fires, other people who need to hear about the price of greed and the weight of murder and the way some debts follow you beyond death and into whatever comes after. Sleep well. The gold is still out there, but for tonight, for this moment, you're safe. You haven't touched it, haven't claimed it, haven't marked yourself as someone who needs collecting from. Stay that way. Stay safe. Stay clean. Because once the gold marks you, partner, once it knows your name and adds you to its list, there ain't no running far enough, hiding deep enough, or praying hard enough to escape what's coming. The blood gold always collects. Always. Always.